And good afternoon and welcome to the 7x24 2023 winter meeting. We have a great show for you guys today. We have butt up, butt volume up. How's it now, Leonard? Little?
Not presenting, but you're not. I'm presenting now. I'm not.
So we want to present. We want to present.
I'm here for now. We will have PowerPoint later, but after our briefing. Our first two speakers are going to be on.
Behind your screen.
I don't think we should be presenting right now.
I can see them. So they see right now. They're seeing that.
We're going to have two other people presenting first, right? From presenting.
We're good. Well, that's a first, a technical problem, and it wasn't my fault. All right, we're going to have a presentation this afternoon from Eaton covering lithium-ion batteries and code compliance, as well as using stored energy in battery systems of UPS to offset peak demand charges from your utility. In addition to that, we will have a risk mitigation presentation from Orlando Dolahan at the Uptime Institute. And we'll also have an overview and some detailed information on the recent power plant retrofit at the University of Washington. So Ed Spears from Eaton is up first. Bill, bring him on.
Great, thank you guys. Bill and Jim for having us here from Eaton. I'm Ed Spears, and I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina. So it's a little bit later in the afternoon, but we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and talk a little bit about this trend that we see with lithium batteries in the data center. So I'm sharing my screen. It looks like it's coming up there okay. And we'll go through a few slides here and hopefully have a little time for questions at the end. You guys help keep me on time and let me know when it gets near time to wind it up so that I don't drone on too long. You guys probably have a dinner waiting for you at some point this evening, so I don't want to interfere with that. But let's go ahead and jump in here. A couple of quick slides. This presentation is set up for professional development hours. We're not administering those tonight, but if you need it someday for that purpose, it is certified for that. So what we see in our business, which my part of Eaton manufactures and sells and services uninterruptible power supplies. And for the last 50 years, lead acid batteries have been the way to go for this application, supporting mostly IT equipment, data centers, et cetera, some medical imaging and some critical manufacturing, but primarily IT equipment, and lead acid batteries have been the best bang for the buck in terms of dollar per minute of runtime. While not perfect, we have had customers that point out over the years that these things are big and heavy, and I've got to deal with sulfuric acid, and I've got a 5-year replacement cycle, and I need better monitoring capabilities on the battery that's more reliably telling me, if I've got the amount of backup time that I intend. So for quite a while, we've heard a frequent refrain from our customers that says, hey, forget your fancy power electronics in the UPS. We need a better battery. And there have been several pretenders to the throne, but they all ended up being mostly too expensive and otherwise limited until along about 2017, 2018, we began to see lithium batteries come on the market. And of course, at first, they were hideously expensive, many times the cost of the same lead acid battery. But that changed pretty dramatically and radically in 2018, 2019. The cost of lithium solutions went way down as the lithium vendors recognized that this part of the market, while obviously not as big as the electric vehicle market, was still a market they wanted to play in, and they adjusted their pricing to make sure that the other lithium competitors didn't get in and take that market away. So as a result, we end up today with some cases where a lithium solution is at parity or very close to a lead acid solution. And as a result, we've seen some significant changes in users' specifications and behaviors regarding their UPS battery. So if we look at a quick benefit sheet here, you see two battery cabinets side by side. They both have the same amount of battery backup capacity or backup time. The one on the left is a lead acid valve regulated lead acid battery, or VRLA. The one on the right is our Samsung battery cabinet. And I definitely don't want this to devolve into a sales presentation. I'd let you know up front that this lithium battery cabinet's available from all of the top UPS vendors exactly as you see it here, and has had good acceptance in the marketplace. So we're using that as an example. But both of these cabinets side by side are the same amount of backup time. But if you look at the floor space on the left, the little orange and green blocks there compare the floor space between these two solutions. And we've found from a lot of clients that floor space is a big part of their purchasing decision because they're actually keeping track of how much they pay or how much revenue they can get. If I'm a large operator, hosted services provider, et cetera, how much revenue they can get per square foot of space. They would like their power infrastructure to be small rather than large. And if you can show significant floor space reduction, that's valuable. It's also much lighter. If you look at the table at the bottom of the slide, see the kilowatt hours are both 33, so about the same amount of backup time. The traditional battery weighs 4,800 pounds, and the lithium battery weighs 1,100 or 1,200 pounds for the same backup time. The footprint, we're looking at about 38 inches wide by 42 inches deep for the lead battery, and about 24 inches by 24 inches footprint for the lithium battery. Notice that the lithium battery is significantly taller than both the other battery cabinet and most UPS systems. The vendors of these batteries designed with a definite fixation on footprint. But those are a good number of the reasons why folks have been interested in lithium batteries, but there's quite a bit more to it than that. One of the big things is lithium batteries in this market offer a 10-year guaranteed performance life. In other words, they're guaranteed to produce at least 80% of their day one capacity all the way through 10 years, or the vendor will replace the affected battery or the entire battery string all the way up to 10 years. So that means that our users don't have to anymore necessarily budget for a full battery replacement every 5 years. They can go and plan for up to 10 years and sometimes as much as 15 years without doing the battery replacement with these lithium batteries. So that really impacts total cost of ownership. But lithium turns out to be ideal for UPSs when size and weight are important. Battery monitoring / management is required. For those customers who use a lot of batteries, in many cases, they're very big on having a battery monitoring system beyond just what the UPS vendor provides. Battery good, battery bad, battery time remaining, et cetera. Notice, though, that the term here is listed as battery management, where the battery monitoring system, which is required in all these lithium battery systems, is required to be there, and it's required to both manage the battery as well as just monitor. So obviously it monitors voltages and currents and temperatures and battery balance between the cells and the string, etc. But it's also required to manage. What does that mean? That means if we see a thermal condition that's getting too hot, for example, or the voltage is becoming too balanced, or the float current is too high, or something that could be potentially dangerous, then of course it's going to throw an alarm either through the UPS or directly monitored. But if that alarm is not mitigated within a certain period of time, the battery management system will simply disconnect that string. And that happens whether the user wants it to happen or not, or whether they like it or not. If there's a thermal issue, for example, we flag an alarm. A few hours later, the problem hasn't cooled off, so to speak, that battery is going to be out of the picture. So that's a little different than we're used to with traditional UPS batteries, where all too many of us just kind of hope that that battery we haven't been able to maintain for the last few years at least is going to give us a couple of minutes in the next power outage before it's time to replace it. If the lithium batteries are not happy, Elvis leaves the building. So we want to make sure everyone's aware of that kind of thing. The other thing on the right, you see the other benefits are the long service life. We've already mentioned at 10 years, 10 to 15, according to the vendors. And also the high cycle count. In other words, ability to do lots and lots of charge discharge cycles over that 10-year life without impacting the 10-year life, at least up to a certain level of cycles. So those kind of things make lithium a decent choice for IT and data center applications. It also opens the door to some non-standard UPS applications that are beyond just sitting there and waiting for the next power outage. So we'll talk more about that as we go. What about safety? We need to broach that topic right away, because that is a legitimate concern. Many of you have had the experience of going on YouTube and Googling lithium battery and fire and seeing things that make your hair fall out and your teeth hurt and all that kind of stuff. And that's on a battery in a laptop that weighs 12 ounces. We saw earlier that these battery cabinets weigh about 1,200 pounds each, and there could be 6 or 7 or 8 of them on a given large UPS, and I might have 4 or 5 large UPSs in parallel. That's a lot bigger than your laptop battery, so it better be safe. How do we know it is? So on the left, battery management system, which is required by fire code to be included on every lithium cabinet. It's the main reason that we feel comfortable about the safety of these batteries. It is going to monitor the battery and take proactive action long before any temperature gets too high or current gets too high or voltage becomes too unbalanced. The other thing we do in the industry is we use the safest available choices for lithium-ion chemistry. Not all lithium batteries are the same. They're not the same inside or outside. And some of them are better suited for UPS applications, and some of them are better suited for cell phones and laptops and electric bikes and those kinds of things. The vendors also design, we're talking not about cell phone batteries, but about UPS batteries. They design their battery systems to release heat faster than it can build up, even during an abuse condition, like very high ambient temperatures and very severe overcharge or over discharge. So in a phone or your laptop, space is of extreme importance. You're packing the battery in a very tight place, and you don't have a lot of margin for thermal issues. Whereas in the UPS battery, we want to keep the footprint small, but we are able to provide plenty of airflow both inside the battery modules and inside the battery cabinets and around the battery cabinets. And again, the system is designed by the manufacturer to release heat faster, even under adverse conditions, faster than it can possibly build up. So that limits the possibility of thermal runaway. Now, the codes and standards that we comply with as the industry here, and just about everything we'll be talking about is going to be true, not just for Eaton provided batteries, but for everyone that sells lithium batteries in this market. So we're have batteries are listed. The batteries themselves are listed to UL 1642. The battery system in its cabinet is listed to UL 1973, which includes references to UL 1998, which is the standard for software and programmable components, i.e. the battery management system, which we'll abbreviate BMS, that we already talked a little bit about. A couple steps down there, UL 9540A is not a listing. There is a listing called UL 9540 without the A, but UL 9540A is simply a test method for verifying that if I light a lithium battery cabinet on fire and sit there and watch it burn, that the flames will not propagate to any adjacent cabinetry or the wall or the corner where it's placed in or whatever. And that results in a test report that the lithium vendors have and that we have as sellers of this product, that we can show to an authority having jurisdiction, for example, and let them feel comfortable that even under real serious fire conditions, that the flames won't propagate, which is something that's very important for lithium batteries of this size. The last thing there is UN, as in United Nations 38.3, which is the transportation safety requirements. And the reason it's done by United Nations is it's intended as a global standard, and it mostly dictates how the batteries will be packaged, whether they're individual batteries or battery cabinet systems. Also how the packaging will be marked, how the batteries themselves will be marked, and how the transportation vehicle, whether it's a truck or an airplane, is to be marked as well for safety purposes. And what it does in the end is keeps users from throwing a lithium battery in a flimsy cardboard box and sending it back to a vendor for analysis. Want to make sure that it's packaged and shipped per these UN 38.3 requirements. So ideal use cases, UPSs, of course, but also battery energy storage, or BESS, which could be indoor or outdoor. Typically, we're talking about longer backup time, 1 to 4 hours, maybe even more, used strictly as an energy storage application. And when they get that big, they need to be able to be deployed outdoors as well as indoors, which means they need the kind of climate control arrangements that I would have if that battery were indoors, regardless of what the climate is or what the weather is outside. It also allows their use along with a UPS or an energy storage power converter as what's known as a DER, a distributed energy resource. And this nomenclature comes from the perspective of the grid operator or the utility company. They're looking for ways to help balance the energy use in their grid in that part of the city or town or wherever you're located. And they're looking at things like solar farms and wind farms and customers that have generators available, and looking at those as something called distributed energy resources that hopefully they can call upon to use without having to fire up that big natural gas peaker plant at huge expense on the hottest day of the year or the coldest nights of the winter. So we mentioned a little bit ago that lithium-ion batteries are not all the same. They use different chemistries for different reasons: performance, safety, cost, etc. So we see two different lithium cabinets on this page. The one on the left we've already seen, and its chemistry is a combination of lithium manganese oxide, or LMO, plus NMC, which is nickel manganese cobalt oxide. And NMC in particular is very common chemistry for lithium batteries as used in electric vehicles. Why? They want the most mileage per charge, and the nickel manganese cobalt have an excellent specific energy. If you look on the left at the spider web charts, nickel manganese cobalt is on the lower left there, and you see the specific energy line at the 12 o'clock position is quite high, and specific power is pretty good too. What's the difference? Specific power is the ability and the rating of that battery to dump all its energy relatively quickly, like we would do in a UPS system with a 5 or 10 minute battery. Specific energy is a little more related to the longer, slower discharge and how optimized the battery is for that application. Safety down there at the 4 o'clock position is quite good for NMC. Performance at the bottom means performance at temperature, lifespan, and also cost there. The other common chemistry that's becoming more common today, especially because of its extra resistance to thermal runaway, is lithium iron phosphate. That's IRON, and sometimes abbreviated chemically LFP. So lithium iron phosphate 5 years ago was about 30% more expensive and also about 30% larger than other lithium choices. And that two strikes basically put them out of the game for a couple of years. But they've narrowed that gap amongst all different vendors significantly. to where the price is pretty close. The power density is almost as good as the other choice. And they, again, have notably more resistance to thermal runaway. It's easier for those batteries to have a successful UL 9540A flame test, etc. So that's one of the reasons that in the UPS business, you see typically NMC or LFP. Lithium manganese oxide is a good choice as well. As you can see, the Samsung cabinet over there on the right is a combination of both, because they get better performance with the two chemistries together than separate. The one you don't see in this application is lithium cobalt oxide. That's what's in your laptop and your cell phone. And the idea there is to provide lots of specific energy so your cell phone runs all day before you have to recharge it. Not so much necessarily specific power. Lifespan needs to be good, but not great. Why? Because Apple wants you to buy a whole new phone when that battery reaches the end of its life. And they don't want the battery lasting so long that you don't buy a lot of new phones. So that was more or less predictable. But the important thing here is look at the safety bar there. Now, remember, these batteries are built and sold in small consumer electronics, power tools by the billions, and have really an excellent safety record. But again, remember, that's a pretty small battery. It's generally kept in pretty reasonable conditions. We're talking about a much larger format battery for UPS applications. So lots of information on this page that's very unbiased, doesn't favor a particular vendor or chemistry. And if you look at the source at the bottom, there's a link to a site called batteryuniversity.com, which actually is where this information came from. So the takeaway here is not all lithium is the same. But we are very careful about what kind we use for UPS applications. All of that being said, the adoption rate continues to grow such that it surprised even old people like me who've been in this business for quite a few years. We thought it was too new and too different in a risk-averse business, as we all know, where most of our customers and clients and users and engineering firms, they like to do it the way Grandpa did because they know that works. And they're not too interested in the newest, greatest thing until it proves itself. So we expected a long, slow ramp in the acceptance of lithium batteries. And for some customers in some markets, that's true. But in general, we've been taken completely by surprise because the lower price and the long service life have made a pretty powerful value proposition for a lot of these customers. So the way it is today for us and our competitors is for large UPS systems, and by large, I mean bigger than 200 kilowatts, 60% of the ones that go out our doors go out with lithium. Same percentage of bid requirements and requests that come in request or require lithium batteries. In spite of safety concerns and the fact that it's a relatively new technology in this application, et cetera, it's been a dramatic turnaround. It really has taken a lot of us by surprise. Why did this happen? Well, if you look over on the left, down below, the successful UL 9540A testing was able to alleviate a lot of the safety concerns, not all of them, but a lot of them, both for the users and for the authorities having jurisdiction that are going to have to sign off on this installation and perhaps waive some of the more restrictive elements in the code that we'll get to eventually. Deployment is easier than it was. With some of the cabinets in the early days. Not only did you need to connect positive and negative DC to the UPS by power cables, you also had to provide AC power, either 480 volts or 208 volts, derived from the output of the UPS. So that power was present even when the utility was off, when the UPS is running on those batteries. And the reason that AC was necessary was to go over to the battery cabinets and power that battery management system that's built into every battery cabinet. So that was an unexpected inconvenience for everybody, from the designer to the contractor to the end user, to be able to, or to have to provide AC to a battery cabinet. Just not used to doing that. The other thing was the UN 38.3 shipping requirements were such that 4 years ago, most of the vendors were not able or allowed to ship a battery cabinet with the batteries already installed. Even if they weren't connected together, just with the batteries on the shelves, they weren't rated to do that. So those are two things that are changing now with more modern lithium cabinets. Nowadays, a new lithium cabinet will run with internal power from its own battery rather than requiring an external AC source. And most of the new lithium solutions out there, the one on the right is an example, ship complete. not without the bus bar, excuse me, not with the bus bars that link the battery modules together, but with all the battery modules installed, all the control wiring installed, et cetera. So it's a very quick process to literally install that and commission that battery once it gets on site. So those are two of the things that have helped to increase the acceptance rate, especially in very recent years. We also have got customers who are looking to take advantage of the smaller size and space and actually buy a bigger battery. Well, why would they do that? Most of the data center operators that we deal with today are generally trending towards shorter backup times, even the kind of thing you'd get with a flywheel or even a supercapacitor. So why are we looking at longer battery backup times? Well, in parts of the world, longer battery backup times are still important. But what we are seeing as a trend, especially in California and some other places where the municipal requirements and city ordinances and things like that are starting to make it very difficult to get a permit for a generator system, especially if it has an underground tank, especially if it's a diesel-based generator. There's restrictions on environmental performance, how much diesel particulate can be emitted into the air and for how long, how much physical audible noise the generator makes, those kind of things. We're finding customers who say, look, it's just too hard for us to get permits for a bunch of large generators, and we're considering not using generators and getting longer battery backup on our UPS, maybe position that UPS and its batteries outdoors to compensate for the greater size. So that's pretty radical change as well. And certainly not every customer is asking to do this, but the challenges and frustrations they're experiencing have been so significant that they've come to us and said, what can you do in terms of like a 2-hour battery, for example? And maybe they do that in place of some of the generators. So it all depends on where you're located and what the requirements are. Here in Raleigh, North Carolina, the generator we have or had at our manufacturing facility was restricted both in the size of the generator, the size of the diesel fuel tank, and finally was restricted and basically eliminated from being allowed because the residential area grew up around the factory location, and now they couldn't run it for more than 10 minutes because of the noise. So in the end, we basically had to get rid of that generator and go elsewhere for generator testing and things like that. So we've seen it ourselves. Okay, let's take a look at some trends now that we've got a little bit of background here. A couple things we want to talk about: energy storage systems beyond just what you would see with a UPS with 5 or 10 minutes of backup, and then those demand management programs that we mentioned before as well. Here's an uncomfortable fact. Data center customers often have large batteries and large UPS systems that most of the time are sitting unused, quite frankly. And if I'm a data center operator and data centers are my business, in other words, if I'm a co-location provider, a multi-tenant data center, a hyperscaler, then they've got finance folks just like we all do who walk up and say, man, this is big and expensive. What is it for? And the data center manager explains patiently that it's necessary to keep the data center up and running if the power is disrupted for any purpose. And they go, well, don't we have generators for that? And the answer, of course, but they don't start instantaneously. So this massive UPS system with its giant battery is there basically to bridge the gap while the generators start out in the backyard. And the finance guys go, so how often do you have power disruptions? And the answer is almost never, maybe 0.001% of the time. So it's a huge upfront investment. It's not only an upfront investment, but a cost of ownership, maintenance contracts on the UPS, maintenance contracts on the battery system, replacement of all of those batteries every 5 years, whether you use them that much or not over 5 years, they have to be replaced entirely. Capacitors, fans in the power electronics, et cetera, give you an operational expense or an OPEX cost to go along with the CAPEX cost at the beginning. So the money people say, well, is there any way that we can monetize this UPS? Anything we can use it for when it's not supporting the data center? And of course, the data center manager says, oh, I don't think so. This UPS is definitely necessary. If we don't have it, we're going to have a power-related disaster, just a matter of time. And they're not really interested in sharing that security with any other function or feature. However, as many of you know, when you get into debates about this with the finance folks, sometimes the money people end up on the winning side of that argument. So let's see what's possibility and what wasn't a possibility until very recently. What we're talking about is using a large UPS system with a battery as an energy asset. So something that could actually generate revenue or incoming cash to the user. Instead of being a financial drain on the operation, it's a necessary cost, both CapEx and OpEx. Be nice to have the UPS as an energy asset. So a UPS system, by its nature and by its design, has the flexibility to modify your site's electricity consumption from the grid. Well, how does it do that? Well, if I think of a typical UPS, and you guys may know that in general, a UPS system is loaded less than 50% of its capacity. Maybe that's because it's part of a redundant system, or because the headroom when they designed the UPS allowed for only about 50% loading or 40% loading. But it's very, very common to have a UPS system loaded at 50% or less. So what that means is in day-to-day operation, that UPS system has 50% of its kilowatts and also 50% of its available kilowatt hours in the battery available. They're not using it. So can it be used for something else? And this is a pretty radical thought at first glance, certainly. But the controls are there. The technology is there. It's always been there. The difference is lithium batteries are able to open the door to this kind of operation, mainly because they have a 10-year life, but more importantly, because they're more amenable to lots of charge-discharge cycles, as opposed to traditional lead battery. So this allows the user to do a couple of things from their perspective. They can take advantage of time of use electrical rates by skimming power off of the battery, and we'll see how in just a second. They can shave the peaks for their facility, again, to protect from that cost. They don't want to set a demand charge that will increase their utility bills for the next 12 months. Those kind of things by using the battery as a buffer here. If we look at this from the utility company or the grid operator's perspective, they are needing to balance their grid and be able to handle the hottest day of the summer, the coldest nights of the winter, without having to turn on very expensive extra generation capacity. And so they know that if they need to be able to balance their grid, or if they are required to be able to do so, keep the voltage and frequency constant across the grid, etc., then one good way to do that is to get their users to modify their behavior. If you're going to get someone to modify their behavior, how are you going to do that? You're going to pay them. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Some of you may have programs in your city where you can mount a little device on the side of your home that's operated by the utility company, and they will pay you a certain amount per month or per quarter to have the ability to turn off your hot water heater while you're in the shower. So, so that's exactly what we're talking about here, with the exception of the shower problem. And by the way, we don't know how the utility company knows if we're in the shower or not. So that's a totally different topic. But at any rate, this is what we're talking about, using the UPS with its battery as an energy asset. So if I think of an energy storage system that some customers are looking to deploy on their site, in other words, they want a big battery and the ability to store energy for shaving peaks and things like that. And if this customer happens to be a data center operator or a critical power user, then they either have a UPS or they're contemplating a UPS. And over on the left-hand side here, in the center of the slide, really, you see the blue blocks. In a traditional UPS system, you've got the grid connection, the transformer, switchgear, AC to DC rectifier, DC to AC inverter, and the critical loads that are connected, and the battery connected to the DC link in between the rectifier and the inverter. If I'm considering just a pure energy storage system, I have many of the same blocks. Grid connection, transformer, switchgear, and power converter, we'll call it. It could be a bidirectional AC to DC, DC to AC converter, and a large battery that could be easily 50% of the cost. So what we're theorizing here, and it's not just a red hot idea that we had, customers came to us and said, can we use our UPS as an energy storage system, or can we use our excess capacity to develop a revenue stream from the grid operator, or to simply save ourselves money by shaving peaks and taking advantage of time of use electric rates and things like that. So if you already have a UPS and you need an energy storage system, you don't have to start over again with additional new hardware. You could go to your 5-year battery replacement mark and say, okay, maybe I replace my lead battery with lithium. Now I've got a 10-year battery that's rated for lots of charge discharge cycles, and I didn't have to deploy a discrete energy storage system in addition to a UPS system that I already have. So here's some applications of what that looks like. This is a peak shaving device, and it goes outdoors in this case, and it has a power converter. Looking at the open graphic on the right. It has an inverter systems based on one of our UPS products, and most of it is space for lithium-ion batteries. These are also made by Samsung, but they are lower C-rate batteries intended for longer, slower discharges, and the NEMA 3R enclosure with lots of air-cooled air conditioning and HVAC on the top of the cabinet. This one happens to be 400 kilowatts of peak capacity, 228 kilowatt hours. So that means it can run 400 kW on battery, but only for about 30 minutes. Yeah, in many cases, customers may need an hour or 2 hours or longer. But here's an example of one that's used to support EV charging stations, which are very subject to peak power rates and demand charges. So they're looking for something to shade those peaks and balance their energy use. And they only need about 30 minutes of battery backup. The restriction here is this device has to fit in a parking space at your local Costco or Sam's Club, wherever the EV charging station may be. So that restricts considerably how much battery and power electronics you can have in the box. Also requires special certifications. Look on the right-hand side of the slide. If I'm going to use this to interact with the grid and run in parallel with the grid, I'm going to need a separate listing than what we have typically for UPS, UL 1741, 1741 SA or SB, which is not listed here, and of course NFPA 855 compliance and a heavy-duty enclosure for outdoor use. So this is just one example of an energy storage application. Now I'm going to run through these next slides quickly because we don't have too much more time. This just basically shows in detail what the difference is between an energy battery and a power battery. Power batteries dump their power quickly, like in a UPS application. So a high C-rate battery, and by that I mean 5C or 6C, means that that battery is designed and intended to dump all of its energy in 1/6 or 1/5 of an hour. So in between 10 and 12 minutes, that battery is set up to completely exhaust itself. An energy battery is more optimized towards the long, slow discharges with the emphasis on long. So a 2C battery is going to be rated to discharge its entire capacity in 30 minutes. A 1C battery is going to discharge the entire battery in 1 hour. A 0.5C battery means the battery is rated to be discharged over 2 hours. Can I simply buy a 5C battery and use it for any of these applications? Yes, but the high C battery is going to be much too expensive and require much too many battery cabinets, for example, if my application only calls for 1C or a 1 hour discharge. So think of C rate as an operating limit, not a capacity limit or any measure of capacity. It's basically has to do with how it's rated to how quickly it's rated to discharge. It's okay to discharge it more slowly than the rating. It's not okay to discharge it faster than the C rate. Why? Because it gets too hot and you don't want that. So there's an example at the bottom of the slide, and I'll be glad to provide this presentation to anyone who's interested. It's a publicly available presentation, and you can take a look at that if you'd like. So what impacts the energy, the life for these batteries? Most customers with lithium are expecting not 5-year life, but 10 to 15-year life. So how do you control the degradation of that battery? Well, you do want to have some limit on the number of cycles. 5,000 a year would be too high, for example. I also want to limit charging rate. It's nice for the batteries to be able to recharge quickly, but the faster I try to recharge them repeatedly, it's going to have a negative impact on service life. You also want to stay within the temperature band. If your ambient temperature is too variable, too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter to be ideal, then you're going to want to have climate control in the battery enclosure or within the battery itself. It can be air cooled and also be liquid cooled. So degradation factors really are repeated down in the bottom left of the slide: number of cycles, charge rate, and temperature. Also, there's a minor impact on battery life. The amount of time with some lithium chemistries that you keep it at the maximum state of charge or the minimum state of charge. some of these chemistries, the manufacturers tell us you want to maximize the service life of this battery. Don't keep it at 100% 24/7, 365. Keep it at 90% 24/7, 365, and it'll make a significant improvement in the service life of that battery. We'll also see another purpose for that in just a second. So here's a little slide that this particular one is not animated, but it shows the UPS being used as a distributed energy resource and three modes of operation. The one on the far left is traditional UPS operation. Power flows from the utility input on the left where the little orange arrow is and follow the red arrow right straight through the machine and out to the critical load. Power always flows in the same direction from input through the rectifier converted to DC. Tops off the battery, the inverter takes that same DC and rebuilds an AC output, sends it out to the critical load, way UPSs have worked since the 1960s. And the battery capacity is basically held available, all of the battery capacity to support the critical load. But if you look at the battery icons there just below the graphic, you notice there's a yellow segment at the bottom, and that is the amount of the battery capacity that's needed to keep that data center running for, let's say, 7 minutes. So what's all the green stuff up above? That's unused battery capacity. And the white stuff, white area right above that, if you can see my cursor, is excess battery that has not been charged. So this battery is probably sitting at 80 or 90% charge instead of 100%. So let's say the need is to reduce demand. I want to reduce demand to avoid peak charges, or the grid operator is going to pay me to help them reduce their demand by the use of a large UPS system. Could do this with generators as well. So if I want to perform demand reduction, I want to reduce the incoming power coming into this UPS while still providing all the power necessary for the critical load. So what I do is begin to control my battery discharge, and I don't do a full current, full power discharge, which would only last 5 to 10 minutes. I skim energy off the battery in a controlled fashion, and I can do that for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or 15 seconds or a half hour or an hour. And during that time, some of the energy to support the loads coming out of the battery, so less demand, less energy is coming into the UPS, and the battery does slowly discharge. We definitely do not want the battery to get down low enough to reach the yellow area at the bottom, because that is reserved for data center support. So we need to know exactly what the state of charge of the battery is while we're doing this. And with lead acid batteries, typically, we don't know that with a lot of accuracy. The lithium battery management systems do provide accurate and timely real-time state of charge information, and that part of the reason we use lithium for this application. Suppose the grid operator wants me as a distributed energy resource to add demand to the grid. Well, why in the heck would they do that? Well, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. There's not a lot of demand right now. The voltage is drifting up on that section of the grid. The frequency is getting a little bit faster. It has to be kept stable by law, usually. So the grid operator has some very expensive techniques to help manage that. But it would be nice if they could talk to their distributed energy resources electronically and say, can you guys add some demand to the grid for the next 30 minutes? So that is when, for example, we would charge the batteries from, say, 80% up to 100%. So it's usually only a short period of time. And if the batteries are kept at 80 or 90% of their capacity, then we do have the ability to add demand to the incoming part of the UPS. And if I'm trying to do time of use rates, I would wait to charge my batteries until 1 o'clock in the morning when the time of use rates are lower, and do a little skimming of energy off the battery at 10 a.m. when the utility rates are much higher. So again, from the user's perspective, he or she is using the battery system as a buffer to help them avoid demand charges, shave the peaks, and take advantage of time of use charging. From the grid operator's perspective, they're using this excess battery capacity spread across multiple users to be able to help manage the demand on the grid. So if you think of a distributed energy resource as one UPS, it's certainly understandable. How am I going to, make a big move the needle in this picture? Well, from the grid operator's perspective, they're looking at multiple distributed energy resources. Let's say, for example, that I have a hospital campus with 9 buildings, and in those buildings I have a total of 25 UPS systems. They're all different sizes. They all have different amounts of battery capacity available. So what do? We deploy a company that specializes in this, and they provide what's known as aggregation software. So the aggregation software manages all these 25 UPS systems, and to the grid operator, we look like one large distributed energy resource that they can pull from if necessary to help balance the grid. Okay, so we've already talked about some of the different things that you can do with this technology. And again, it doesn't require anything special from a hardware perspective. Lithium batteries, traditional UPS, and some special controls which fit in a box that's about 18 inches square, either on top of the UPS or on the wall next to the UPS. So if I buy a bigger battery to operate this way, when do I get my money back? Okay, let's say I've got a 5-minute battery, it's time for replacement, and I'm thinking about deploying a 35-minute battery or 30 extra minutes of capacity so that I can get paid by the grid operator to participate in these existing programs that pay me to participate. So let's take a look at one choice over here on the left. In 2021, we looked at grid operator PJM, which operates in New England area and some partly the Midwest, Chicago area, et cetera. And they were looking at about $38,000 of net revenue over the year on a 1 megawatt UPS from demand response programs. But if they're going to buy a battery big enough to participate, that was going to cost them an extra $100K for that battery. Remember, it'll last 10 years. So that was a 2.5-year simple payback for them. They also have the ability to have a finance company handle the purchase cost of the battery and the UPS if necessary. They don't get any of that net revenue, but their incremental capex is zero and no risk to the end user. Do the same thing for a 2-hour battery. Now you're talking about significantly higher capex for a 1 megawatt UPS, about $430,000. So the payback stretches out towards 6 years. But that gives you an idea of what the potential payback could be here, and helps customers decide if this is the right idea for them at all. Okay, I'm going to move quickly through the codes and standards because it's getting late, and I don't want to put you to sleep before your other presentations. So I'm going to hit the high points here very quickly. We've now, and our competitors certainly have done thousands of installations of these lithium batteries. And while we're not legally allowed to interpret the codes and standards for the users, our lawyers wouldn't like that, but we do know certain things that we can let potential users and their engineering firms or architecture firms know as a heads up, what to be ready for, what to think about at the design stage, not on installation day. So what kind of codes and requirements are we talking about? New fire code, IFC 1206, about time we got used to using that. They changed it to 1207 last year, but this has much more information on stationary lithium batteries than the previous fire code, which was IFC 608 had. So we need to be familiar with that. We mentioned UN 38.3 and UL 9540A. The other one standard that's cited most often is NFPA 855. And the requirements for lithium battery installations in NFPA 855 and Fire Code 1207 are very similar, but we should not assume they're identical. Got to be familiar with both of them in case there's a minor difference. These are the kind of things we'll be talking about here. So what's in the latest Fire Code 2021 that has to do with lithium? Well, first of all, what size lithium has to comply with this new Fire Code? Does the one in my laptop have to comply? No, it's too small. What this table shows is the threshold quantity. And if I look at lead acid batteries, all the different types, it says if your battery system is bigger than 70 kilowatt hours, that's about 2 large battery cabinets on a big UPS, then it must comply with the code. Lithium batteries, anything bigger than 20 kilowatt hours, must comply with this code. And the battery cabinets that you see on the lower left corner there are about 34 kilowatt hours, so they definitely must comply. So you should assume if I'm putting lithium batteries on a large UPS, got to comply with the code, no way around it. So let's see what that involves. What's different for lithium than it is for lead acid? And I'm going to pretty much call questions by the end of this slide. Just wanted to hit the high points here. First of all, if you're less than 20 kilowatt hours for some reason, you have a small lithium cabinet, you're not required to comply with the code at all. But the vast majority of lithium cabinets for UPSs are greater than 20 kilowatt hours. So the new code says the room location for this lithium battery shall not be more than 75 feet above or 30 feet below the lowest fire department street level, typically street level fire department access. That's to make sure that the ladders on those fire trucks can reach that room. And that's a requirement. You have to get a waiver from the authority having jurisdiction if you want to put that battery on the 29th floor, regardless of how small and light it may be. The maximum lithium quantity in a room is 600 kilowatt hours. So that sounds like a pretty high limit if each cabinet is only 34 kilowatt hours. But if I've got 3 large UPSs with 6 battery cabinets on each one, and they're all in the same room, that's over 600 kilowatt hours of battery, and that requires a special hazardous occupancy class, special construction of the room, etc. Again, can be waived. How? How do you get these things waived? Now, you use that UL 9540A test report that says no no propagation of flames. Notice that the code says cabinet spacing 3 feet on all sides, front, back, left, right, unless it's waived by the authority having jurisdiction using the 9540A test. Almost no users of the tens of thousands that we have are doing this because they have that UL 9540A test that says flames don't propagate. Got to have UL 1973. You have to have a battery management system. If someone tries to sell you a box of lithium batteries with no BMS, you should run and run now because you'll be running eventually. Got to have battery management system per the fire code. Electrolyte quantity, those of you that are battery geeks may know that over the 50-gallon electrolyte limit for valve-regulated lead acid requires incidental use classification for the room, other building code related restrictions. They don't express it in gallons for lithium. They say if you've got more than 1,000 pounds of lithium, you're going to have to set up the room as an incidental use classification. So each of our lithium batteries and the competitors as well, between 100 and 120 pounds of electrolyte per cabinet. So I'd have to have 8 to 10 cabinets to get over 1,000 pounds. So these are the kind of things you want to think about at the design stage. What we recommend is talk to your authority having jurisdiction at the design stage. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to put it, and let him or her tell you what will be acceptable to them. It's somewhat subjective, but for a new technology like this, this is the way it's actually set up and the way the successful installations are happening. So with all that being said, if it's okay with Bill and Jim, we want to take a few minutes for questions or go ahead with the next presentation. Either one is okay. I'm available if you need it.
Yeah. So we've got an overhead mic system in the room on this one, so we don't have the handheld mics. So if anybody has a question, what we'd like to do is, Jim, if you point out the people with their hand up so that one at a time, and the mic above you here, the little UFOs will pick up what you say.
So questions, Leonard?
Well, 9548 testing, there are jurisdictions that will not allow you to use that exception with that test to decrease the or increase the battery or the grouping size, 50 kilowatt hours, or the spacing. A very prominent example is Santa Clara Fire Department. They won't let you do it. So you still have to limit the grouping size, and you have to provide the spacing between the cabinets, even if the batteries have the UL 9548 test.
That's right. We have seen that certainly in California and certainly in New York State, specifically New York City. So the larger cities are definitely, in many cases, and for good reason, being a little less liberal, if you will, with the waivers, and that's absolutely understandable. And boy, you want to know that up front, not on installation day, because if I look at a cabinet that's 2 feet by 2 feet with 2 or 3 feet space for service at the front, that's a pretty small footprint. If I go 3 feet on all 4 sides, that footprint balloons to 64 square feet per every individual cabinet. And boy, you want to know about that up front rather than at installation time.
Any more questions?
Ventilation requirements, are those left over from the lead acid, or does that apply?
Yeah, I missed the first part of that question. If one of you could repeat it.
The hydrogen detection / ventilation requirement a leftover from the lead acid days, or does that apply to lithium?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what you should assume is that you're still going to need a gas detector. It's not so much the hydrogen that we're trying to detect, but there is some hydrogen sulfide if you catch these batteries on fire. But there's a few other gases that might be objectionable as well. This is more a problem if you're packing lithium battery cabinets into a container box out in the backyard or whatever, where there's very little free air space. In a typical battery installation room, whatever that is, the ability of that gas, even during a fire, to get above 25% of the lower flammability limit is limited. But to answer your question, probably going to need gas detectors. And if the inspector says so, you'll need to have ventilation and possibly a fan system that if the fan fails, it goes to the UPS and turns off the charger, etc. Some of the newer codes that I see being literally within the last few months being applied says your fan system needs to have a back so that the fans can run for 2 hours if the AC power goes off. So that's separate than your UPS with its lithium battery. Same thing is 2-hour support for your fire detection system for the building or the room. So lots of things to think about as you contemplate this type of installation. Not just lithium, but lead as well.
Additional questions? We're all awake, right?
I don't hear any snoring on my end, so that's a good sign.
Well, thank you, Ed. We really appreciate your supporting our chapter, and great presentation. Thank you.
Great. Glad to help, and I appreciate your time and interest. Thanks.
Next up will be Resiliency and Risk Mitigation. And that will be presented by Orlando Dolahan, who is the Director of Client Engagement for the Uptime Institute. Orlando, you're on.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Well, Jim, thank you for inviting me this afternoon. And more important for the audience here, thank you for joining me. This should be rather quick. I'll present our results of a survey from 2022. So most of you know Uptime Institute. We've been around quite some time. We are now over 110 countries, and we have over 500 assessments and certification, and growing. So the overview of what we're going to be discussing today: hybrid IT environments in the enterprise, IT organizations, state of the cloud in the enterprise, and new risk in the hands of few major cloud providers. And even the hybrid IT environments, outages persist, and the cost per outage is increasing. We'll go through some numbers here. And of course, hybrid multi-cloud resiliency mitigation strategies and implementation. Well, background on the information you guys are going to see today. We actually perform a survey every year, and what we also do is remove some of the answers from manufacturers to make sure that the answers are salient to the information we're trying to get here. And more important, really, we also annotate those numbers in the bottom so you have a better idea of where that information came from and the percentage and how it affects the actual numbers. So what you're seeing here is we separate finance and insurance for one major reason. It affects their answer in some other topics that we discuss. And that's why there's two separate pieces here. Finance and insurance also have fiduciary responsibilities, whether it's mandated by the federal or local government, that they have different organizational requirements for reporting and auditing. And again, it affects differently in some of the questions, but the reason this two are showing is that pretty much 90%, over 90% of all organizations, enterprise-wise, are using some sort of hybrid deployment. Quite common now. So one of the reasons that we look at hybrid deployment is geographic reach. Not everybody everywhere would be able to be supported by actual hybrid deployments. And these are some of the reasons and some of the alternative courses that people use. If they are not able to be supported by coverage in a specific area, they would go to colo and other alternative cloud providers that make sure that covers their area. So that's one of the things that you have to look at in the survey. It is different for different folks. And what we're seeing here is obviously to everybody, corporate data centers are going down. And what you're seeing here, light blue today, in 2 years projected. All of the data center movement leaving the data center in the next 2 years are actually spreading across to the right. Everybody understands that, everybody's seen it. And what you're seeing here is really micro data centers. That is actually becoming another topic of interest for a lot of the enterprise folks that we deal with. Micro data center, edge data center, many names to it, but that's also becoming a way of deploying data centers in faraway places and still own the actual infrastructure. One reason that folks need to understand about scaling, it was promised that you can scale by just giving them a number and a credit card. You can scale to whatever you want. But as you can see here, more than a third of the actual respondents of a 126 had the problems. The provider failed to provide resources when requested by organizations. You have to take this in consideration if you have a very dynamic growth pattern and or need for IT support. And if it is not in your contract, you may face this, unless of course you're a large organization with a lot of sway in that company. Another consideration to look at, and again, if you were to consider this as a contractual obligation, is SLA, that they will provide you some certain growth level, that will cost you money, and that would be also wasted money if you never use it. One of the things that we have predicted, and maybe not, is that people have retreated from and permanently terminated its production applications from the public cloud provider. A quarter of them did this. And if you think about moving to a cloud, it costs you money. Moving back from the cloud also costs you money. That math had to work or not work for them to move the production applications out of a colo or move into a colo and out of a cloud. Interesting enough, we are seeing more of that from large organizations also, and we'll dive into some of the reasons why, and some obvious and some not obvious. Why? The cost is an issue, and this is a hidden cost on top of costs that they found out they needed to keep their business running. 40% said it costs more than they expected. In the very beginning, cloud, again, promised cheap, too cheap to meter, easy to actually scale up. And of course, nobody talked about resiliency and zone coverage and dropouts and outages. I think the cost here you're seeing is more than expected because people signed up thinking this is the cost. And I've had clients had this problem. Sign up for low cost cloud provider, find out that after outages that they needed more service that did not sign up for, and to get the actual business objectives met and deployment resiliency met, it costs them more. So this cost you're seeing here is actually a blended cost. The other huge thing that folks thought that they have applications they've been using for a while, business dependent logistics people have applications that they are not only dependent on, but it's their lifeblood. What they found out was moving that and developing that for cloud application created way too many variables, unpredictable results, and ultimately cost them way too much and too challenging. That was affected by the next two cloud items, legislation, compliance. That changed HIPAA, and the fiduciary responsibility of banks to know where all that data and data breaches also. So all of these reasons have made people move back from the cloud back into a data center or colo. Again, some of the new and not so exciting changes in compliance are coming, and some of those I think may also result in less visibility and what we're going to call a black box in cloud. So outages and frequencies are down, but the costs are actually increasing. This makes sense. People are getting better, fewer outages, but the significant and serious are getting smaller. But what we're going to find here is that they're getting more expensive. So the yellow pile here on the left of 2019 is $100,000 worth of money lost to outages. As you move to the right in 2022, it's gone down by 50%. But if you look at the 2019 of the dark blue, that's $1 million or more. That's more than double to 2022. So even though the lower cost outages have gone down, the more expensive outages have gone and probably undercounted in a lot of aspects because a scale and the IT level dependencies mean outages affect more services. And one of the things that we find, and we deal with folks that have these outages in recovery, is that they do not count the cost of the soft recovery cost. A lot of the folks that are supporting the recovery is never blended into the actual number. And the third bullet point there, significant effects. It isn't just money anymore. In fact, I am working with a client that lost $20 million worth of hardware, but that hardware was supporting new, and what I mean, new developed or sale equipment in the following year. That got postponed for 6 months. Outside the $20 million worth of hardware loss, they now lost new and exciting products to be deployed, and everything got pretty much tossed on the side for 6 months. So even though the outages are getting fewer, they are getting more expensive by what our clients are telling us. The most painful part of this, anybody in this room, is that we work towards relieving the client of outages. And if you look at the data here, 60% said yes, downtime was preventable. But now, a 2022 137 respondents said 78% of their outages were preventable. Now, I have to add that hindsight has 20/20 vision. When you look at something after this happened, done all the due diligence, look at root causes, it's easier to understand what happened, how to prevent that. So it's also important that when you say it is preventable, that you do look at root cause, how to prevent that, how to mitigate that, and how to create a plan, how not to do that again. So again, it is preventable, and one of the things we're going to look at is why and how. So one of the issues that I'm going to call the black box problem and why the cloud adoption has slowed a bit is because of the big news items of cloud providers dropping huge regions of the United States. Now, what I call a black box is, do you really know, and you need to know, if you want to troubleshoot how to prevent that, what happens in between it leaves your source or data center, goes to the cloud, and goes to the end user. And what you're seeing here is that today we don't place mission critical workloads in public clouds and have no plans to do so. 37%, right? But one of the things you're going to look at here, enterprises are running more mission critical workloads in the cloud, but they have no visibility on what's going on behind that. So one of the things I keep saying here, again, it's a black box effect. You know you're getting stuff done, but if it breaks, how do you solve that? And I think what we are looking for is transparency And once you have better transparency, and it's going to take legislation, just like outages, nobody's going to tell you their outage, nobody's going to tell you their recovery, and nobody's going to tell you their SLA, and how it plays out in actual recovery costs, because that they don't want to tell anybody, and everything is happy unless you know about it. So again, transparency is probably the biggest issue for people going to cloud and not really being able to rely on what happens next if something does happen. So operators investing more in site level redundancy. This again was brought on by some of the larger outages that has occurred. If you look at the bottom part, cloud and hosting software as a service provider are actually providing more increased redundancy because what they have experienced, it's no longer looking at, hey, I have enough power and cooling and I can transfer that load to somebody else. We know that those failures of connection points that create regional outages. So they are more acutely affected by those large outages, bad press. And so they too have decided that, yes, we are going to actually increase power and cooling redundancy, site level redundancy, along with co-locations. Enterprises are pretty steady at that 31, 32%. And I think what you're seeing here is the people that were affected are now asking the third-party colos and cloud providers better comprehensive redundancy and less outages. One of the many things that people do not understand is the vulnerability of zone outages. Now, significance, performance, and issues or downtime, it's 35% what people see. But then again, low-cost cloud implementation usually start with single zones. In speaking with an AWS and actually a solutions provider for AWS, he actually looks at how these things work. He says there's many ways to skin a cat. Most people do not understand that, and they look at it only at the value of the dollars. What we all know in the room, I'm sure, is that the low cost is not usually the best way to go about that. And so even the idea of zone outages has not been part of the actual discussion when people are looking at it in terms of how do I go to the cloud. Most mature cloud and large enterprises now understand that, but most folks that are stuck in single zones have to find alternative ways of getting to the cloud and multiple cloud on ramps. So what is needed? And as we have said, better planning around resiliency and risk mitigation. One of the things that most people do is that they do create a plan. They have a resiliency risk mitigation. But what the problem is, if you have a black box in the cloud, how do you work around that? And myself, I would love to understand what people are doing out there in the situation where they do have a cloud and not fully comprehended what has happened when they do have an outage and what happens inside that cloud. So, second bullet point, investment in redundancy is becoming more important. That in itself is everybody across the board, colo providers, cloud providers, and of course, data center owners and operators of enterprises. Again, improved transparency from cloud providers is a huge discussion point for anybody interested in laying all of their business objectives in someone and not themselves. Although large corporations are definitely not moving away from the cloud, but the process of moving to the cloud, what applications, how critical those are getting better scrutiny and no longer just the purview of the IT and some high level guys. The whole organization is now involved in planning. They must be involved. So operators need better management, planning, and process and training. That has always been the key, but all of those are just not necessarily easily implemented. We are working with a large organization, fairly large global. And one of the things that happened to them, like anybody that has grown within this industry, you grow organically, you have lots of solutions based out in different sectors of your business unit. But in the end, the corporate edict comes from the top, and all of that organizational skills, the operators, management, and planning have to come from the top down. In other words, the organization have to see it that way, even the cloud going to the cloud. And what we're seeing is that disjointed, disparate requirements by organizations and business units that's never does not necessarily align with the cloud. As one large user said, I have people looking at deployment and I am here trying to run that deployment and we never get to talk to them and they do not understand our business. So that disconnect and that different agenda is key in resolving this issue of what do you really need the cloud to do and how does it meet your business objectives. And again, the assessment, the key understand the issues, hidden gaps, underlying problems. Once you get these people all in the same room, and that's what we do, is you start finding these variables and gaps and finding solutions on how to get there. And last but not least, test, test, and retest. What we find is people say, okay, we have the deployment successful for months at a time, and never really doing a full test, whether it is a DR site or a transfer test, a drop dead test. What they experienced at the heat of the moment is all these variables, contingencies, and all these black boxes in between their their critical apps to actual production to the end user that uses them. They fall into gaps, and then that's where the losses happen. And what I mean by test, you first test it when you install it. You test it again when you have users on it. When you take it down, you must have constant a retest because these applications are critical. Therefore, they are a living and breathing application, and therefore they must be constantly tested. And more important, really, where we are at now, and security breaches happen every day. That testing must not only include the application resiliency, but the black box again in security. That's what's actually included in going into the cloud. You must now understand also the variables and the gaps that you may create. Very tough unless that application has actually been designed for the cloud. So one last comment again, test, test, and retest. And that's the only way you can constantly keep up with the changes going on. So we have three primary image uses. And you could read there, most operators, data centers are growing. True, the capacity they're growing because they're moving their stuff out. And that's why the co-location providers are being more bullish about growth expectations. A lot of the corporations, large and small, are trying to get out of the data center industry business because that's really not their business. Some people will always be stuck in that. They will always require a data center. And those people are always going to be able to keep their business running by keeping it in their house, but everybody else will try to go to a colo. Modernization of IT applications remain the top driver. Server refresh, but power consumption is an increasingly important factor. Let me tie that in with the second one. Higher power server densities is the future, but nearly one third cannot accommodate this without upgrading the infrastructure, increasing capacity. So one of the things that we are finding is that liquid cooling is back in vogue. Some of the larger deployments out there can no longer sustain the growth because they are being limited. And again, back to new laws, California is a great one. Not in my backyard. All deployments and new data centers here have been limited and might as well not build them here. So what they're looking for is efficiencies. And back to liquid cooling, that is again, people are throwing down and doubling down on liquid cooling. So that has become in vogue, and probably the commercial realization of the liquid cooling is coming. So the unexpected costs are driving a legacy application back to work. Again, if your application was not meant for the cloud, lesson learned for anybody out there that's failed. Don't go there. Look at replacing the application for cloud specifics. That'll get rid of a lot of the issues and headache and deployment. But last quote, nobody's ever going to leave the cloud. It's going to be here forever. So this is the commercial and my end. It's about resiliency. That's what we do. That's what we actually do assessments. And more important, any questions?
Do we have any questions in the room? Not seeing anybody's hands go up. All right. Any questions online? I haven't seen any.
Orlando, thank you very much. We appreciate your supporting our chapter.
All right, Jim. Well, thank you for inviting me.
Started again. All right, next up on our agenda is our Northwest Chapter Scholarship Fund. And the Scholarship Committee, Bill Hunter, is going to give us an update on their progress. So I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Jim. Everybody can come back to the front. Have a seat. Huh? I need to use my parrot voice. I don't have one of those. So I want to give you a quick update on where we're at with our scholarship efforts. So for those of you who've been following along home, we have been working with the Shoreline College, one of my alma mater, to establish a scholarship fund. We've set that up now. 7x24 Northwest Exchange Northwest Inc. or Chapter Inc. Scholarship Fund. So starting at the end of March, which is when the first set of students will, basically the deadline for them to apply for this particular scholarship, there are two $2,500 scholarships that will be awarded. Hopefully we'll get more than two people asking for them, but two $2,500 scholarships that will be awarded to students at Shoreline that are in STEM programs and that have an interest or a demonstrated interest in the data center industry. Now, if you know a student that is or may be going to Shoreline, you can tell them about this. We have a page on our website. Let's see, what 7x24northwest.org. We will have links to the shorelineawardspring.com website, which is where people can register and apply for the various scholarships at Shoreline, as well as ours. We will also have a link to shoreline.edu, which has their foundation page, where you or your company can donate to our scholarship fund, either online, via email, or by check. And those funds would then become part of the scholarship fund that is being held by the 7x24 Exchange Northwest chapter. These funds are, so the Shoreline Fund is a 501c3 exempt, tax exempt status. So if your company or you donate to this fund, it is fully tax deductible. Interesting. So get out there and raise some money for us. Also, we are looking for your help. For you here and online, we need to have people on the scholarship committee working with Lee Moss and others to review the scholarship applications that we receive starting sometime around the first part of April. So if you're interested in participating in that process and working with a scholarship fund, please let either Lee Boss or myself or Jim know. You can find our email addresses on this page that shows the scholarship fund, as well as the contact page on our website. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
So, kind of like the shoreline that you're targeting for.
STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math, and there's a series of programs that are available at Shoreline College that fit into those general categories. Any other questions? With that, thank you very much. Jim?
Okay, next up is Ursula McCready. She is the founding chair of our WIMCO initiative, and she's going to give us an update on the WIMCO program. Just like Microsoft, they want me to update whenever I don't. Yeah. No, it's not your presentation. That's right, that's not your presentation.
Well, hey, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ursula. I work with Performance Power Concepts. And yeah, last December, we decided that I would be the WIMCO chair. I think probably because I was the only one who put up my hand. But I'll take it by default. And so in this presentation, basically going to go over what we've done so far and what we plan to do this year. For those of you who don't know what WIMCO is, I'm going to do a brief introduction about kind of what our goal is here in the Northwest chapter. Also going to be discussing membership. And also something that I'm super excited to talk about is the event that we're going to have next week, which is International Data Center Day. And as I mentioned, kind of also teeing up what we plan to do for the remaining year. So again, for those of you who don't know what WIMCO is, our Seattle chapter recognizes the importance of a diverse workforce. Our WIMCO chapter wants to help facilitate opportunities for leadership and community outreach initiatives such as educational events like International Data Center Day and topics that support inclusivity, career development, and STEM programs. With our group, we really do want to influence and create a pool of diversified workers by showcasing the various career choices within our industry. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was going to college, I didn't think that I was going to end up in the data center industry. I am not a math and science person. I'm a business major. So, ending up in this industry was completely by accident. But I've been doing this now for 13 years and I absolutely love it. I've had some amazing mentors along the way who have really taken me under their wing, and I've been willing to take all of that knowledge and apply it. And here I am today. But as with anything, I could not do this alone. So I really want to recognize my fellow committee members. Billy with Cummins, she couldn't be here today, but I believe she's online. Chelsea Cooper with Compass Data Centers. Alice Frazier, she's here in the back. Kimberly Panchana in my office as well. She's here today. And Brittany. I think the biggest thing I want to say about these committee members is although we are all in a data center related field, we all have such diverse backgrounds and heritages. And so when we came together to start talking about what we were going to do with this committee for this next year, I think our unique perspectives and diversity that we all have personally really is reflected in the event that we're going to have next week and hopefully translates into what we want to accomplish moving forward here in the Northwest chapter. So the big news, International Data Center Day. Has anyone seen me post this on LinkedIn? Are you aware of what International Data Center Day is? Just a brief kind of show of hands. Do we know what this is? All right, that's awesome. Most of the room knows what it is. So that's awesome. So 7x24 on a national level really wanted to do things to help promote awareness of data center careers and data centers in general. And so one of the ways that they're doing that is International Data Center Day. Again, being a focus on grooming people to get into careers in these related fields. So WIMCO, as you heard earlier, part of our initiative is to, again, create that awareness. So that's where I said to the board, I would love to take this on and host an event. This, again, was in like December. So we've had 3-ish months to put this together. And you guys all really answered the call to action. We have had so much support so far for our first event. And I really wanted to highlight the sponsors who really stepped forward in a really big way. My biggest thanks to AT&T, because again, without having a facility to do this in, that wouldn't have been possible. They are hosting us at their Bothell 9 facility, which when I first came up to the Northwest, that was the very first data center I visited up here. And I'll never forget, Danny, who is one of their facility managers, put me in the corner of a data center where I could look from one end to the other. And I was just like, dude, this is so cool. Like I had like a total little geek out moment and it was fantastic. So the fact that they stepped up, I was so appreciative. Sequoia, who I think Buddy's here tonight, again, stepped up in such a big way and is hosting like the t-shirts for everything. And we've had a couple other really big sponsors like Sabi and Compass Data Centers, and everyone else like Cummins, Enersys, PCL Construction, and PDO Cables, who are providing things like pens and paper and lunches and things like that. We are going to be hosting about 25 students from the North Shore School District. And honestly, thanks to your guys' generosity, we raised over $2,000 really in a matter of a month because I put out that email to everyone in February and so many people raised their hand, whether it was, again, like I said, supplying pens and paper for the event, saying, hey, I pledged this much money, or hey, I'll buy the shirts for that. So again, my sincere thanks to you guys on that because this couldn't have been possible without the chapter members. Like I said, we've got students coming from Bothell, Inglemoor, and Woodinville High School. And again, the biggest goal for this event, for the speakers that we have coming, is to tell kids you don't necessarily have to be an engineer to be in a data center related field. Absolutely, yes, we have that path, have someone speaking to that. But like myself, I am in a sales role. We have someone, Alice is actually talking about supply chain. These are all different things that people can go to school for, or even a certificate program. I think that is something that is really becoming more widely accepted now, and really educating kids that you don't necessarily have to be in a 4-year program. You can be in a certificate program and still come out in a lucrative career and not just a job, but you don't know what you don't know. Right. So that is the importance of International Data Center Day. And we've already had some data centers raise their hands for next year. So I'm really hoping in the years to come that we can have this in different areas around Washington and really, again, promote awareness for this next generation of people to know that, hey, this is an option. So really excited about that and more to come after the event. And I'd be happy to share that with you guys. So again, kind of coming back to just WIMCO in general, as far as our chapter is concerned, really wanted to get some feedback from people. I would love and encourage you all to kind of go back and tell your female peers that this is an option that you can get involved in. Some of the things that we've thrown around is a women's golf clinic. I've recently taken up golf in the last couple of years myself, and I absolutely love it. But I'm not going to lie, I was super intimidated to get started with that. So really wanting to try and find ways for women to get more involved and get out there with you, because let's face it, girls like to drink too. But really want to know what kind of events people want to go to. That was one thought. We also kind of threw around like having a women's centered networking event. But like with anything, I really want to encourage people to understand that WIMCO is not just about the women. Yes, it's women focused. Yes, it's a diversity focus. But again, if we're really going to ever affect change, every single person needs to be a part of that conversation. It can't be a one-sided conversation. So again, I really encourage everyone, when we put these events moving forward, it's really for everyone to participate. So I really don't want the whole women in mission critical to discourage you from participating moving forward. The other thing that we want to try and push is mentorship. As I mentioned, I am eternally grateful to the mentors that I have had in my career. Everything that I've learned about this industry was on the job training. On the job training, again, super underrated in this industry. And yet I think that is something that resonates with so many people in this room, online, male or female. We've all had people who've taken us under our wing and really helped propel our careers moving forward. So again, in order to implement something that makes sense at the chapter level, would love to hear feedback from you guys. If you guys already have mentorship programs in your businesses, how can we try and kind of combine what's already out there with the 7x24 initiative of creating a mentorship program? So I've got my email up there. It's also on the website. I encourage you to reach out to me if that's something that you would love to be a part of, because again, many hands make light work. So I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on that. And that's all I had. Thank you guys very much. Questions? Awesome. Thanks, you guys.
And thank you, Ursula. Up next, we saved the best for last. We're honored tonight to have Mark Kirschenbaum with us. He is the Assistant Director of Utilities for the University of Washington, and he's going to bring us up to speed on the Reliability Enhancement Project at the University of Washington Power Plant. Here, help. That's,
Actually share it through Teams because it didn't show up on the last one.
oh, really? Okay.
Do you guys want to watch a video of what the campus power plant does first? Sure. Time wise, are you, is everyone, it'll go over. It's 10-minute videos. But it's pretty. Go for it.
Let's do it.
Stop it. Share that out in Teams. Share window. Window down. All right. All right.
Those Windows 12.
This is window.
There it is.
Put a media player.
Media player.
And
Let's. Yeah.
Mike, yes.
Okay. That was the direction I was headed. The mic is not muted.
Back and start it again. Point of teams.
Good. Okay, great. So that little propaganda video kind of explains what we do, and we've been doing it since the very founding of the university in 1895. Let's not jump ahead on the, let me get this going on the slides. Okay, so let me back up. So this is a presentation that I and a team of other engineers gave at a recent conference in Texas, part of the International District Energy Association. I don't know if any of you are aware of that or have heard of them before. Once a year, they have a campus energy conference, which is a collection of all the big schools and campuses across the nation and campuses from other countries. So it's a great opportunity for us to compare notes because what we do at the UW is not particularly unique. So we can learn from other facilities as big as we are or smaller or bigger and try not to go down the wrong path. And it's a great way to exchange ideas. And anyway, it's a great gathering. And this is where I took the presentation, modified it a little bit for this group. The first, what's a DRUPS? It's an acronym that sounds a little silly, but it's short for Diesel Rotary Uninterruptible Power System. So very similar in operation as a battery powered UPS. It's there to ride you through a power interruption, except this one's bit bigger and mechanical in nature, and I'll get to more of that here in a minute. A little bit about the UW. The video you just saw is actually like 7 years old. We've already grown quite a bit more students, more buildings, more square footage. But basically, we were founded in 1861 as the territorial university. We weren't a state yet. And we moved to our current site in 1894 or 5, composed of 3 campuses, Seattle, Tacoma, Bothell. Seattle by far is the biggest one. Total enrollment last year was 60,000 students. Total between the 3 campuses now 20 million square feet of floor space. And we have about 7.5 miles of utility tunnels feeding the campus. There's a Google picture of what the campus looks like. Kind of, I could give you square footage, but I think things people relate with like utility costs. The university spends $23.5 million a year on electricity, almost $2 million a month. Natural gas, 8.7 million. Water, sewer, $9 million a year. So big place, a lot of buildings, big operation. So the current plant, well, the first plant was 1895. We was replaced in 1901. This is where I joke about campus master planning. There wasn't any, right? 6 years between the first 2 plants, 7 years to the plant number 3. They finally got it right though. And where we built the 3rd plant is where we are today. Primary fuel is natural gas. So that picture with the clear stack, that's not photoshopped or anything. We don't smoke at all. The only thing you'll see on a cold day is a vapor plume, but no actual smoke. And we buy most of our electricity from Seattle City Light. Like the video mentioned, we produce about 5%. Question a lot of people ask, why not more? But we produce what we do to keep the plant reliable. Anything beyond that, we're not buying hydro. We're producing fossil fuel-based electricity. So it's not in line with our sustainability goals. So we keep it to a minimum. So when we undertook this project, we had to conform with the university's sustainability goals again. So these were the goals: divest from fossil fuels, 15% energy reduction, 45% greenhouse gas reductions, on and on. So we couldn't do anything that went against those goals. So as we contemplated the scope of the project, we had to keep those in the back of our mind. So as we sat and talked amongst ourselves and our engineering firm we hired, we wanted for sure an uninterruptible supply of power to the plant. We wanted to increase its reliability, and primarily by simplifying it, which means for us going to a single steam pressure, right? Current day, we have 2 different pressures. We have to change the pressures to meet campus heating needs. It was the way it's been done for over 100 years, but it's not the way we want to do business anymore. We need to simplify, reduce energy consumption, and going to single pressure was going to lead us in that direction. And we have a lot of old equipment. The newest boiler in the plant is 23 years old. The oldest boiler was installed in 1948, still used. So we have to update ourselves long enough to where we can eventually move away from fossil fuel combustion. But in the meantime, we still have to be reliable. So as we contemplated what path we were going to take, and we had a lot of external interest on what we were going to spend our money on, we had to convince people we had looked at all the options conceivable to make the plant more reliable. So fuel cells, renewables, on and on, as the list shows. That spreadsheet, which obviously you can't read, is where we listed and graded all the different options in typical, right? Green is good, red is bad. And that eliminated a bunch of things that just weren't going to work, didn't meet the goals, didn't meet budget, didn't meet schedule, whatever. And we had to do that to convince a big portion of the campus that we weren't wasting money or paying lip service to sustainability goals, whereas we, the engineers, were just going to get what we wanted anyway. But this proved we didn't do that. So we did select boiler D rates. So there's some more info coming, but we wanted to go to a single pressure, which meant D rate the pressure of 2 of our big boilers.
Replacing our steam turbine generator. You saw it in the video. I'll touch on it again later in this presentation, but that steam turbine generator, that green thing, was the source of power for the plant. So in a power outage, that turbine would ride through the outage, keep the plant powered, and we can continue to support critical research and the hospital with heat. But it was spending more and more of the year down for maintenance and repair. It was installed at 68. 1 month a year in the middle of summer, scheduled maintenance, fine. 4 or 5 months out of the year down was unacceptable, and the hospital was getting nervous. So we opted to replace it, which also, of course, makes the plant more efficient, because if you got to make steam to heat the campus, you can send it through a turbine generator, make electricity. Great example of co-production of using a single energy source. And we settled on some form of diesel rotary UPS system. We weren't sure which one yet because of 2 different styles, but we opted for that. Now, the existing steam system, as I mentioned, 2 sets of boilers, medium pressure saturated and higher pressure superheated. And sorry, I'm an engineer if I'm getting more than you guys want to hear, but and the superheated boilers were the ones that were primarily for power generation. But again, from a 1968 perspective, we didn't need superheated steam anymore to make power. So we were going to derate to get down to that simpler plant configuration. So again, there's that old steam turbine, 1968, getting very unreliable and expensive. Parts were made to order, 20 weeks, 50 weeks lead time, which, again, I'm going to poke fun at Eaton. 50-week lead time is not such a big deal anymore, right? It's very common. We ordered switchgear from you guys, and it doesn't come till August. So, hey, that's all good-natured fun. We still bought it from you guys, though, right? So we got the business. Okay, so, but the hospital, like I said, is getting very nervous, right? No heat means no surgery, no sterilization, no patients. And they were getting worried, so we had to fix this. So the image on the left is what the plant looks like in a very simple diagram. 2 sets of boilers operating 2 different pressures, feeding to a turbine generator, lots of lines running all over the place to keep the place redundant. And what is on the right is where we're going. Much simpler. All 5 of our boilers will operate at the same pressure. Just makes it really simple. So taking a boiler and reducing its pressure is not just a simple thing. You have to get a hold of the OEMs, get their buy-in, designed, because you got to change the internal boiler. So luckily, even though we had one of the boilers from 1968, we contacted the OEM. They went to their file cabinets, and there was drawings, and we got a study done, and it was feasible, and we moved forward. And boiler 6, the one on the left, was completed and is now operating at a new pressure. Boiler 7 starts next month. So just the idea when I say, like, what do you, superheated boiler, removing, so superheating is just taking steam and adding more energy to it. Those vertical tubes on the left picture, that's the superheater. So exhaust gas is flowing over those pipes full of steam, raising the temperature, in this case, up to 650 degrees Fahrenheit. Once those tubes were removed, the space now looks like the picture on the right, sealed, all beautifully re-insulated, because the key thing to remember is without cooling, the flames in the boiler are hot enough to melt the metal tubes. So you can't leave things uninsulated. Everything that's not insulated has water flowing through it, creating steam, but also cooling the steel pipes. This is inside the steam drum. The left image is what it used to look like. Very complex equipment to make sure moisture is not carried out of the boiler. So clean, dry steam. And this is where steam is not the wispy white stuff you might be picturing. Steam is a clear, energetic fluid we're using to power equipment and to heat the campus. But reducing pressure allowed us to simplify the steam drum, so we have a much more open design now. That's on the right. And of course, there's a bunch of piping modifications to move high pressure steam output of the old boiler into the now medium pressure steam system of the plant. And there's the finished boiler that was started last summer and now operational at its new pressure as of November. So the steam turbine went through a similar idea of what are we going to do? we decided we do need one. So we went ahead and selected a new unit operating at a much lower pressure than the original unit. And yet the original unit, which was a superheated steam turbine operating at 5 megawatts, our new 185 PSI, so half the pressure, less energy, makes 3 megawatts. And it's tiny compared to the 1968 unit. So it was a simple decision, payback, which is not a university thing, right? Typically was 5 years. So it was a really easy decision for us. We're happy with 20 years. We're actually looking at keeping equipment for 50 years. So a 5-year payback goes, wow, let's do it. So easy decision. So the new generator, half of the turbine generator, arrived from India at the end of this, January. And yep, it's purple. Boss insisted. It wasn't my idea. Anyway, it arrived from India. The turbine itself arrived from Germany just a couple weeks ago, and it will be delivered to the plant probably in about 2 weeks, and then the assembly will start there, and it'll become operational in August when Eaton's switchgear arrives. Sorry, I can't help it. Okay. It's your shirt. I can't help but pick on you. Okay, so there's the turbine. And of course, before we could bring the new turbine, we have to make room for it. So the old turbine had to go. So just some quick images of here it is sitting in the turbine bay, switchgear behind it. We started disassembly, just breaking it down. Now, moving the generator was a challenge. That thing weighs 15 tons all by itself. So we brought in Ness Campbell cranes, who came up with this really cool rigging system that picked it up and rolled it across the floor. We do have a service bridge crane rated at 15 tons, but McKinstry, the contractor doing the work, decided 15-ton device, 15-ton bridge crane. No, our safety people aren't going to go for that. Even though we weight tested it just before the lift, they opted to bring in the specialist company to do the lifting. So now to the focus of why we're here, right? The DRUPS install. Again, just to kind of rehash, the turbine generator was the power plant's source of backup power. And what I mean by that is we are always in parallel or hooked into with the utility. The turbine's running, making electricity more than what the plant needs. But since we're paralleled with utility, excess power was exported out of the plant and into the university's electrical grid. So if the Seattle City Light died, which is rare, but they do once in a while, the turbine would be running, we would island the power plant, and we would just ride through and continue to operate. But it only works when the turbine generator is running. And again, going back to the 3, 4, 5 months a year it wasn't running was a risk we can take. So we evaluated, do we do the traditional diesel generator route, which even though the plant in the video, you might have noticed, like we have 10 megawatts of diesel generation in the plant, but none of it was dedicated to the plant. 6 megawatts to the hospital, 4 megawatts to the campus. So we thought, okay, well, we got to get one for ourselves. But that still left that 10-second startup gap. In 10 seconds, the whole plant shuts down and it takes us 4 or 5 hours to recover. Again, the hospital can't live with that. So we said, okay, do we get a battery to do that 10-second ride through, or do we get some sort of diesel rotary system? So we kind of weighed our options on what to do. Here's pictures of our 2 megawatt diesel generator sets. Here's a Snowbridge PUD's 2 megawatt lithium battery storage. Not as compact as the new ones, right? Their systems, I think, like 8 years old already. So it's just they're advancing rapidly. But our problem is we had room in the plant. We don't have any room outside of the plant. So putting 2 megawatts worth of battery generation to take the place of our diesel generator while we waited for it to start, it just didn't sit well with anybody to have it. We don't have any room outside, and then putting this thing inside just didn't seem the way to go. So we ended up going with the diesel rotary system. So now there's 2 basic types. The electrically coupled, which means this blue cabinet on the left, that's where the kinetic energy module, the flywheel and generator system sits. The diesel generator is separate. You can put that anywhere in the system you want, feeding into a common switchgear, and then you have to integrate the two to work together. Or you have them mechanically coupled, where you have the traditional diesel on one end, the generator in the center, and the kinetic energy module on the left, all sitting on one skid, one shaft as a unit, and all supplied by one company. And that was the thing that really sold it for us. We could get the whole system, switchgear and everything, through one vendor. They're responsible for integration. So we opted to go that route, and that was the high-tech machine, which you have a high-tech rep here, Justin, who's a member of this group. So there's your plug. So what are the benefits? I kind of touched on it. Excellent ride through. The system is running all the time. So the generator and flywheel are spinning constantly. The generator at 1800 RPMs, the flywheel is at 4200 RPMs. It weighs 6 tons, which is a lot of mass, but it's good for 30 seconds max of 2 meg power, more like 25 seconds. But that's more than enough for the diesel engine to start up. Since it's starting unloaded, it will come up to speed and take over driving the generator within 2.5 to 3 seconds. So it was the answer to our problem. So the thing when you're going to install one of these is, do you have the room? So the unit weighs roughly 64,000 pounds. Luckily, the spot we had picked in the plant had a roll-up door leading to the outside. That was really convenient. So you could roll the components in, and but you got to consider other things, right? Ventilation access, radiator location. Again, luckily, this is a power plant, so fuel lines, exhaust pipes, all that stuff. We're industrial space. We could easily accommodate it. So believe it or not, the Drups is in this room. You just can't see it behind all the electrical gear. That square box on the right, that's the switch gear, arc flash rated. The ducting's not installed yet, but there'll be later images of that, I think. A lot of controls, but again, all supplied by high-tech, one vendor, which made the integration and layout very simple. Now, the tricky part is taking our new Drup system, which was a 2 megawatt 4160 machine, volt AC machine, and integrating it into the existing plant electrical system. So that's an image of McKinstry's electrician tying in the new system. And of course, when you do that, the relays have to be reset. You got to do a coordination study, but surprisingly smooth project. It went really well, and the connections are all done. But the Drups went in a spot in our electrical system that also connected into the emergency power system of the 10 megawatt installation. So we had to make sure things that they did with our Drups installed didn't impact the 10 megawatts of diesel generation too. So this is the control area for the 10 megawatt system. So this was a point that where the electrical engineers from Stanley talked about the need for thorough investigation of the existing documentation to make sure you landed the right wires in the right place. You didn't disconnect the wrong wires, because you could easily not synchronize one of the engines, right? If you're working in the same cabinets. So the results online and operating, we tested it using a load bank up to 2 megawatts for 6 hours, I think. Did all kinds of trip testing. But when it came time to when they asked me, okay, let's disconnect the plant from utility and see if the Drups works. Well, this was December. We're in high heating mode. So I whisked out. I said, no, we'll take our risks. I'm going to trust that you guys know what you're doing. And lo and behold, during the Seattle ice storm on December 24th, Christmas Eve, the unit activated. And I have a graph of that showing you later. But here's some images of the unit being rolled in. It came in 2 parts. This first unit was just the engine. So you can see left to right as it's being rolled in on a specially built floor for it. Then the 20-ton generator and kinetic energy module were rolled in. The two parts were bolted together, and the guy in the yellow, the orange helmet is a high-tech field site guy. That's an image of the arc flash rated switchgear. You can see the ducting above leading outside. So the university has been investing heavily with all of our new equipment to buy the latest and greatest arc flash rated equipment because we have plenty of old stuff that's just scary to be around. So we weren't going to do any, Weasley stuff on our electrical system anymore. So we want this stuff to last for a long time. And then the image on the right, which is partially obscured, but that's the local control panel for the drops, which you don't really need to do anything. The thing is fully automatic. It will take over in an emergency and go back to utility automatically all by itself. We just watch it. That's the radiator on the roof, and the black pipe is the exhaust stack. And then the image on the right shows some of the piping coming up from the drops heading to the roof and the silencer unit. There it is, the completed unit. It's quite the machine. It's very cool looking in person. Now, lessons learned. We were grossly underestimated the noise. We all expect diesel generators to be noisy, but that's when the diesel's running. But this thing runs all the time. And we just didn't really factor that in, that how noisy can the thing be when the diesel's not running? Really noisy, like 115 dB noisy. Now it's in the plant, so we can tolerate it, but we are putting noise mitigation panels around it to cut down on how much noise is radiating all over the power plant. It's impacting operations because people can't hear the alarms when they're near the drup system. So that was an important lesson we learned, and we're mitigating as we speak. The vendors, High-Tech is from the Netherlands. So not that that's bad, it's just, it's a protracted process to get exchanging information. Also, one of the vendors for our boilers is based in Europe too, so that just adds to the delays, holiday schedules, all that kind of stuff. And then always, when you're working in a running facility, that you need to closely coordinate with your construction partners. You don't want them banging into the running equipment and shutting down a boiler in the middle of winter, right? So you have to coordinate, and we have really good communications with McKinstry. So this goes back to that voltage sag we experienced on Christmas Eve. So the drops is on our 4160 system. It was running at 4,200 volts. That's that black line in the middle. And you can see that sudden dip. That's roughly I think it was a 2 or 3 cycle sag from Seattle City Light. The red curve, the red line, is the voltage output from the drops. It just wiggled. And then it's kind of obscured by the black box, but there's a gold line. That's the diesel starting up. The operators were like, did something happen? They went out there, yep, it's running. And nothing, we didn't lose a thing in the plant. The campus, on the other hand, all the VFD drives in the buildings for HVAC control systems, half of them shut down. There was problems all over, but the plant just rode through exactly which was the intent of this project. That's it. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, that was Snowpud supplying that. Is that in Bothell then, at the Bothell plant campus?
No, Seattle. No, that battery system from Snowpud was just a display of what a 2 megawatt battery system might look like and why we didn't go that route.
Isn't that site south of the next King County?
The battery? That battery bank, that's in Everett.
Campus in Bothell is in King County.
Yes, yep, just right up 405. Of course, UW Seattle is right across the 520 bridge, and then UW Tacoma obviously is in Tacoma. Yeah.
Yeah.
So our HVAC group, when you have as many buildings as we do, 235, I think, of various ages. The remote ones, they remoted in and restarted them, but some are pneumatic controls. Someone's got to walk in there and hit start on the motor starter. So yeah, a blend of both.
Some of our sites, I noticed and some of our equipment, when the generator starts up and exercises itself on Monday mornings usually, then we'll have to go do that manually, reset some of them, and because they'll trip out.
Yeah. Yes.
Megawatts on that?
It drops 2 megawatts. The high-tech product line is broad. Though at the 2 megawatts, the smaller ones had a really cool cover that came with it. We didn't get that because of the size of the machine, but yeah, it's performed exactly the way we hoped, and has already saved the plant at least once. And like I said, that split-second dip, if it takes out enough machinery without the turbine generator running, which we don't have anymore for the moment, equates to a 4 to 5 hour recovery time. And the hospital is now in a bind. Do they cancel surgeries? Plus, we have animal labs, art galleries. They use steam for humidity control. All kinds of stuff grinds to a halt. So. Yes.
In hours of diesel pool do you have for the drops? How long can you keep running?
So the diesel is completely dependent on the fuel source, right? So we connected it to the existing 10 megawatt system, which is 2 15,000 gallon underground storage tanks, which when you have 6 engines running on them using roughly 100 gallons an hour, that's not very long. But the secret weapon we have is we have a 1.3 million gallon fuel tank for the plant itself, and we cross connected them. So yeah, fuel is not a problem for the plant. Yeah. So the air permit only allows like 50 hours a year, but there's no limit in emergency use, right? So our system is strictly for emergency run.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah. What about the purple? Why?
The drop unit, did you paint that purple?
No, the drops came black and they were like, we loved it black. We weren't going to change it. But my boss heard about he had an option he had a say in the turbine generator, which had not been procured yet. And he got included on the conversation. He said, he's a UW grad. He's like, purple. Like, no, purple. Fine. So yeah, it's purple. Yeah.
My experience with drops expand across. One of the challenges that I ran into as I've run in the past is the maintenance that has to be done on them every 5 years now. Has that changed or is that still the case?
For the high-tech unit, it is every 5 years. So once every year, they need like a 1-day shutdown to replenish the auto greasing systems, do some checks. But every 5 years, you're supposed to change out the bearings on the rotating units because they're constantly running. I think Pillar claims a little bit longer because they're a vertical stack, so their weight distribution is a little bit better. But
Still a 5-year last.
Okay. Well, high tech feels like they need to add to this.
The model that you put in is a 10-year interval for your kinetic energy module.
Oh, okay.
Is it 10 years?
Lubrication system.
Okay. Well, I will need to talk to Will because Will's been telling us 5. But 5-year interval for a 3-day outage compared to every year 1 month minimum for the turbine generator. And that's if we advanced ordered the parts we knew we needed, right? So anyway.
Anybody else? Going once? I don't see any online questions. Twice? Sold. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for sticking it out.
Final, they got $1 million.
All right, that's it for tonight. We'll see you guys all back here on May 16th.
I have set up this.
Developing.